gentlelady who is now chair of the Middle East North Africa Subcommittee and former chairman of the full committee, chairwoman of the full committee, Ms. Ileana.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, ranking member, and thank you to my colleagues to my right. Thank you for bringing the spotlight on this expanding activities of Russia in our hemisphere. Putin's careful engagement seeks to create geopolitical allies in the region that support Russia's expansionist policies. It is not a coincidence that Argentina, Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela were some of the very few nations voting against the UN resolution declaring Crimea's independence referendum null and void. The Russian Federation's activities in Latin America have a clear intent: eroding U.S. influence in our region, increasing military cooperation with the adversaries of democracy, of transparency, of the rule of law in Latin America. By forming military alliances and increasing defense cooperation, Russia has effectively gained power projection of forces right in our backyard. According to the Russian defense minister, supersonic bombers are regularly patrolling the Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Mexico to, quote, monitor foreign military powers, military activities, and maritime communications, end quote, and have on occasion made landings in Venezuela, just as they did precisely 2 years ago today. Earlier this year, a Russian intelligence vessel, as we know, and you've talked about it, docked in Havana the day before the U.S.-Cuba talks were due to be held. And in testimony before the House Armed Services Committee, as Mr. Sirius has pointed out, General John Kelly has asserted that the very same vessel has conducted operations in the Gulf of Mexico and the U.S. East Coast. And we cannot forget that press reports from months ago stated that Russia intends to reopen the Lourdes spy facility in Cuba. We're hearing rumors that Cuban armed forces are helping to fight alongside Russian soldiers in Syria to come to the rescue of the murderous Assad regime. But this provocation from Russia to seek to spy on our interests, to undermine our national security, does not stop in Cuba. This year, Ortega agreed to allow Russia to establish a satellite station in Nicaragua, and Nicaragua recently expressed an interest in acquiring top-of-the-line MiG-29 fighters to be used in counter-narcotics operations, fueling fears that the Russians may have a continuous military footprint so close to our nation. Russia has invested heavily in the development of Latin America, from the development of a nuclear plant in Argentina, Gazprom's gas ventures in Bolivia, technology transferred to the Nicaraguan canal, to the construction of a weapon factory in Venezuela. And the economic engagement, sir, which I read in your written testimony, Mr. Farah, has pointed out in the past has opened the door for Russian organized crime to engage in new markets. The Venezuelan regime similarly has a tradition of mixing business with criminal activities, and one example of this has been the Cartel de los Soles, which has been had significant influence over senior officials in the Venezuelan regime. So I would ask you, sir, what impact, if any, has Russian organized crime had in the region, and are these groups working with organizations such as the Cartel de los Soles or perhaps the Mexican drug cartels? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.